you become like unto the little children. When I emailed that about a month ago to Wavis, she said, are you going to bang on the Bible? I said, how long have you known me? But actually, the starting point for that is I've reflected on that verse a number of times in my life and come up with 6 things. And I tried to get them in the sermon, but only 3 would fit. So I'm going to have to come back in the spring and do the other 3. 3 that I'm going to talk about are curiosity, the miraculous or the magical, and safety. The ones for the spring are gratitude, non-judgmentalism, and having fun. So I'll have to sing The Wheels on the Bus again in the spring. As we reflect upon children, our own childhood, and the fact that I'm the father of 2 children, one of the things that I sense, particularly with children, is a sense of curiosity. And as I was a young adult going to college, I took a number of courses. I was trying to decide what to major in. It ended up to be philosophy. I took some theology courses, but the problem I had with the courses is they had the answers. And that did not satisfy my intellectual curiosity. But in philosophy, I did get a good dose of that. One of the philosophers I met as an undergraduate was the late American philosopher Charles Hartshorne. And a teacher had recommended a book, and it was called Omnipotence and Other Theological Mistakes. And most of Western theology is based on the omni business, all powerful, all knowing, all loving. And that's, what most of us, I know I was, were raised on as children. Well, Hartshorne, who died about 10 years ago in Austin, Texas, at the age of 103, wrote a book called Omnipotence and Other Theological Mistakes, and he said, the world in which you and I live is based on freedom, creativity, change, and novelty. And if we think there's a source of this, doesn't it make sense to say the source is filled with freedom, creativity, change, and novelty? And so he began to question the traditional paradigm. Curiosity. Unfortunately, what sometimes Western education does is drums the curiosity out of kids. And that's a very unfortunate thing. And part of my talk today is to keep that alive in us. I had a round number birthday. I turned 70 up in Alaska the 3rd of July, and I'm more curious than ever. And I've got some real good questions now. So, curiosity. The second thing is safety. Children need to feel safe and be safe. And our job as parents and adults is to provide the envelope in which that happens. Now, for those of you who know, what I do is a healing practice, shamanism. And what's different about shamanism is I go, particularly if I do a soul retrieval, to the spirit world on your behalf. Now, I'm different than your Western MD, your dentist, all these other folks, because as far as I know, they don't go to another world on your behalf. But I do. So, I've done 94 soul retrievals. I go into a trance, I go into a lower world journey, and I don't visit my caves, my 4 caves. Actually, they've been explored many, many times. I go and visit your caves. And the first cave is the important one. It's the cave we call of the original wounding. It's when the world first stopped being a safe place when you were a small child. And what I do is heal that. The reason I heal that is once I get that healed, the rest of them fall like a deck of cards. They fall into place. It's not the trauma last year. It's the trauma when you were 3 or 4 years old. So, as I try to explain this to clients and students, they always want to know, where do you go? And my dentist took a lot of work to get him calmed down. He was afraid that I was going to die in his general chair because I didn't want the Novocaine needle in my mouth. So I said, I'm going. I'll leave my body in the chair, but I'll be back. Where are you going? So here we go. A story about this, and it actually popped up as I was working on this. The Smithsonian came, and iconic American painter Norman Rockwell. And the article was about Norman, and in it, some of his photographs are there. And one of the subtitles of the article is "The Problem We All Live With." It's the late 50s in the South, United States, civil rights. And there's a picture of 3 federal marshals, black suits. They all look like Eliot Ness. It's amazing. They must have went to the same haberdashery. And there's a little black girl, Ruby Bridges. And then Rockwell did a painting of that. And what he did in the painting was very useful. He cut the heads off all the federal marshals and highlighted Ruby Bridges. So here we go. Ruby was a young black girl that lived a mile from the elementary school. This is 1957 in Mississippi. And she was particularly excited to go to the first grade. But some of the folks in her community were not in favor of her going to the first grade. This was the first time a black student had been admitted to this elementary school. So angry mobs of people gathered to protest that movement. So the drill was every morning Ruby would get up, have breakfast, get her book bag packed, and leave the door and be escorted by 2 columns of armed federal marshals on either side to the first grade. Now, I remember going to the first grade in Crafton and walking about a mile and being kind of scared, but I don't remember any federal marshals. I mean, this is really, but she did well in school. And the teacher was very conscientious, and she had met an Air Force officer. I don't remember his rank, but it was Robert Coles, MD, a child psychiatrist. And so she invited Dr. Coles over to talk to Ruby and see if she was handling the stress okay. So he came over and met with Ruby and found that she was just delighted with the first grade. She didn't seem to pay much energy or attention to the mobs, and she was doing just fine. And so he reported that to the teacher. Well, about a month into the semester, the same drill every morning. Halfway between her house and the school, she stopped, and the marshals stopped, and the mob gathered, and she appeared to be talking, but not to the marshals, not to the mob, but appeared to be having a conversation with someone. She finished the conversation and continued the journey to school. Teacher heard about this and called Coles, and she said, "You better get over here. She's doing risky behavior, stopping in the middle of that mob." So Coles came over, and he had met with Ruby a couple times, and asked her about that. And she said, "Well, Dr. Coles," she said, "I always say my prayers before I go to school, and I'm sorry, but I forgot that morning. And so I stopped and said my prayers." And then she looked at Coles and says, "Don't you think that mob needs praying for?" Boom. Now, notice the story here. The black first grader trumps the Harvard MD, the child psychiatrist. It's Ruby 1, Coles 0 at this point. The other thing that is remarkable about the story is Coles looked Ruby in the eye and said, "You're right." Now, how many medical doctors have you met in your life that if a black first grader, or any kind of first grader, skin color makes no difference, would call that person up short and correct them? How many medical doctors, one, would say, admit it, and two, publicly say to the child, "You're right"? So I think this is pretty cool. So he didn't have very much ego in this event. Now, the rest of the story is what he discovered, and I've written an article about Coles. It's entitled "The Moral Life of Children," the thought of Robert Coles. Her moral compass was inside her. It wasn't in her book bag. It wasn't in the first grade desk. It wasn't in her bedroom. It wasn't all these places where she might lose it or not have access to it. It was inside her, okay? Now, the story has a very happy ending. They continued this relationship, and even though Coles is retired and Ruby's getting close to retirement, he wrote a 5-volume series called Children of Crisis, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. And guess who the books are dedicated to? Ruby Bridges. Okay, so they've continued this relationship. So now, back to my original question. When I sense that clients need a soul retrieval, I talk to them about that, do a lot of explanations about it to help them feel safe about that experience. And when I was in shaman school, I had a question. I always have good questions. And I asked the instructor, "Does everyone need a soul retrieval?" And I'm happy to report I found 2 people that don't need one. Perhaps it's a growing list, I hope. First one is Ruby Bridges, and the second is Jocelyn yesterday. Neither one needs a soul retrieval. I wouldn't have anything to clean out of the cave of the original wound. And I hear there's a few more people that are like that, hopefully more. So soul retrieval. All right, safety. All right, now the rest of this, the miraculous and the as I got into this, I began to try to use metaphors and films to explain to people when there are posters inside my front door. The first one is Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, 1865 in England, time the American Civil War is ending, and Alice says, "How far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?" I went down and down, and the deeper I got, the curiouser I got. In terms of, his real name was Charles Hodgson, and he was professor of mathematics at Oxford University. Can't figure quite that out, but that's a lower world journey down the rabbit hole. Some of my recovering Baptist clients said, "Are you going to hell on my behalf?" I said, "No, I don't go to hell on anybody's behalf. It's just down. It's just physically down." Then, 33 years later in this country, Frank Baum wrote an upper world story, The Wizard of Oz. Up, up, and away you go to the Emerald Isle. So we have a lower world story, we have an upper world story. And this continues. There was a group in England during the Second World War called the Inklings. Now, if you look up inkling in the dictionary, an inkling is a slight indication, a subtle hint. And the Inklings were a group of Oxford professors that gathered during some pretty hard times. World War II was raging, and in the early part of it, the English were very worried that the Nazis were going to jump over the English Channel and invade England. Anyway, a group formed, and they met Tuesday night, and I love the names of the English pubs, at a pub called the Eagle and the Baby. And the people, the group never elected officers, never had a formal structure. They just met Tuesday night at the pub. I suppose had a few stout, English beer, and they talked about what they were writing. And here they are, J.R.R. Tolkien, who one day was grading papers in his Oxford office, and I guess he overdosed on grading papers, and he flipped into a trance, and he wrote on the margin of his desk blotter, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," which was the opening line for the 1937 classic The Hobbit, followed by The Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion, the trilogy. Okay, now his colleague in the group, C.S. Lewis, was English from Belfast, Ireland, and he took the upper world, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and other works. And what these guys did is divided the fantasy world up. And Lewis said, you know, J.R.R., you do better at the middle world. You take the middle world, and I like the upper world. And so they divided the turf between them. Now, other people wanted in occasionally. He wasn't too regular. T.S. Eliot and would come in and once in a while read some poems and stuff like that. It's a very interesting group. So now we have the middle world and the upper world. So we've got the three worlds covered. Things are getting encouraging. The lower world is covered, the middle world, and the upper world. Now, this summer I read a book on the Inklings. The interesting thing about J.R.R. and C.S. Lewis is both saw rather nasty combat in the British Army in the First World War. Tolkien was a second lieutenant in the Lancaster Infantry at the Battle of the Somme, which was probably the worst pitched battle of the First World War. But survived that. Lewis was wounded by his own side's artillery shell. And so they both survived the war. Most of J.R.R.'s friends were killed at the Battle of the Somme. And as I read about their lives and experience, here's my thesis. I can't prove it. But I think they had undiagnosed, untreated post-traumatic stress. I mean, they had really seen some horrific stuff. And I think what they did is they took to writing children's books to heal. And you'll notice in Tolkien, some of his battle scenes are pretty graphic. Now, the British seem to be doing pretty good at the traditions, and who's the lady? J.K. Rowling's now doing the Harry Potter series, which are, you got to know which ones to go to, Middle World Journeys. So, okay. Now, so I think what both Tolkien and Lewis got in touch with in their own life that helped them to heal was the magical and the miraculous. They didn't have some of the resources that we have today, so that's what they did to heal. So, unless you become like unto little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of God. What did Jesus have in mind? Well, the three things I've explored today are a sense of curiosity, to have curiosity about yourself and your world, and to have, it's particularly important, I think, to have good questions. Second, to create for ourselves, our children, our families, a sense of safety so that we can all flourish in that environment. And then thirdly, the magical and the miraculous, which these children's authors introduce us to. So the question I have for you guys is, where is the magical? Where is the miraculous in your life? What are you doing to nourish it and keep it alive? In conclusion, when I got back from Alaska, I'm pretty good at sensing presences now, particularly not good ones, demons and stuff like that. And I noticed there was a presence in my bedroom, but it was a good presence, so that was okay. So I just didn't think too much of it as long as it was a good presence. And I noticed over in the corner of the bedroom wall that it changed colors. I thought, oh, that's curious. So I did the homeowner thing. I went down the basement, got a can of off-white paint, and touched it up. And then the next day was when my colleague and friend Phil came over to do some healing work. And I said, Phil, walk into the bedroom and tell me what you see, what you experience. He says, you got a fairy in there. You whitewashed the fairy, August. So I had to do some first-class contrition. And it consisted of a shot glass with wine and 12 amber sparkly crystals. And now the fairy is very happy. So if a fairy shows up, my official advice is don't go for the paint can. Talk to the fairy. Unless you become like unto little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of God. So I hope what I've talked about this morning has in some way ignited your curiosity, the importance of safety for yourself and others. And above all, and I think people like Tolkien and Lewis do this for us, is alert us to the magical. And we think about this in terms of children, but I'm convinced that all of us need it just as much as the kids. Thank you very much.